You're listening to Unlocking Vulnerability, a podcast produced by Helen helping you better understand consumer vulnerability. Hello, I'm Helen Pettifer and welcome to Unlocking Vulnerability. In this episode, I'm delighted to welcome my special guest, Michael Kennelly from the Death Notification Service. Michael is the Business Development Director for Equinity Benefactor and is responsible for the growth and success of the Death Notification Service, also known as DNS. This takes two key formats. First, they increase membership across the financial services clients and extend the services into new sectors, including but not limited to insurance, utilities and telecoms. And secondly, they increase market and consumer awareness. As well as providing an innovative solution to the notification of death, Michael is instrumental in helping not just his own business, where he's currently dealing with on average 300,000 death notifications per year, but also businesses across all sectors to find a better and more customer-centric way of dealing with and supporting bereavement and vulnerability overall. So thank you ever so much, Michael, for joining me this morning on this podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invite.
You're very welcome. So I'm going to pass over to you first off, Michael, just to provide a brief introduction to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, thank you very much again for the invite and the opportunity to talk about Death Notification Service. As you quite rightly stated, I'm the director that looks after DNS, and my responsibility since I joined the Equinity Group some nearly 2 years ago now has been to look at how the service can help not just end users, families and friends of the bereaved, but also how it's helping organisations provide a better way of dealing with bereavement and taking away some of the more challenging aspects to it. So what we're constantly doing across Equinity is not just looking at notification solutions, but looking at the overall bereavement piece, knowledge sharing, what is the best way to provide friends and family members with a point of contact, understanding what it is that friends and family want to do, how they want to do it, and just as importantly, the challenges that exist. So we tend to work very closely with our partners to share knowledge, look at best practice. Different sectors are at different stages of the development of dealing with bereavement and vulnerability overall. And probably it's fair to say the banks are a little bit further down the line in their solutions being developed and deployed in different and more customer-centric ways because of the size and the opportunity they've had to develop that. And for me, the key for us is just getting best practice into every industry and making sure that we are all aligned with how we deal with bereavement.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, it's such an important job, isn't it, really, to sort of really support people when they're going through their darkest time in their lives, isn't it?
It is. And one of the biggest pieces of feedback we get is from customers that have contacted organisations. When saying that, the thing to always remember is that the families and friends that are contacting these businesses sometimes aren't even their customers, and they feel they're having to go through a transaction-led conversation, which they're not in a probably emotional and comfortable position to do. And secondly, they're lacking the detailed knowledge to be making some important decisions very early on in the process in some stages. So yeah, it's really important that we start to put more of a customer lens on this. And the thing we say over and over again is relabeling an internal process, a customer journey, doesn't make it one. No. The customer decides if it's the right journey for them. And particularly when given the volumes of organisations somebody needs to contact, which is on average 21, that suggests that no matter how good your process is, it may only be around 5% of that customer's actual real journey.
And 21 companies that they need to contact. I mean, that just sounds physically and mentally exhausting for those facing bereavement.
It is.
And to have the same conversation again and again.
And we hear on so many occasions where somebody says, I can't have 21. I'll wake up in the morning with the plan of doing this. By the time they've made the second or third phone call, which some can last up to 30 minutes, 40 minutes, they haven't got the energy or they haven't got the emotional capacity to say, I've lost my dad, I've lost my mum over and over again. And to hear what they sometimes call the false platitudes, but I'm sorry for your loss, which sometimes feels it's very scripted rather than a genuine and sincere comment. And that's not a criticism of any organisations, because it's very hard to get this right.
Yes, yeah, I can imagine. So obviously bereavement is one of the biggest vulnerabilities facing individuals today. We're obviously still going through COVID-19. What are some of the challenges people are facing when they are engaging with businesses? We've obviously talked of a sort of a few there, but what are some of the challenges when they are engaging with businesses?
I mean, the challenges we've just discussed there were in what we would consider to be normal circumstances, so pre-COVID impact. So when businesses were able to operate in the way that they always did with the right levels of capacity. So the challenges we're seeing now is, firstly, from a business point of view, is if we go back, 7 weeks ago, most of these businesses had to completely lift their operating models out of potentially contact centres and high street branches and deploy them into home working. So that has obviously caused a degree of resource challenge. And you'll know yourself, anywhere you try and phone at the moment as a customer-facing organisation is suffering from huge volumes of contacts. Therefore, queues are bigger, and maybe sometimes the operational efficiencies aren't there. Somebody's working at home, they haven't got a team leader or a line manager sitting across the desk from them that can take over the call or provide the guidance or answer to questions that need to be answered. From a friend and family member point of view, we've talked about the need to, if you think about the banks, for example, high street banks have always had a high street presence, or still have to an extent. They're doing great work to keep those high street branches open. But people don't feel comfortable going out and sitting in a branch to talk to people. So they're then defaulting to the telephony solution, which is already challenged in people, might be phoning a bank as a concern about being able to pay their bills, their credit cards. So huge volumes of calls are going into an already challenged resource. And these people, maybe something that would have been a 5-minute call now becomes 15 minutes waiting on hold, getting moved around. And so it's just if you summarize it two ways, we've seen two key things. We've seen a huge shift and change in capacity and operating models. I've touched on banks, but it's the same for utilities, general insurance, telecoms companies, anybody that you may need to contact. We've then seen, sadly, an increase in death. If we look at April, the data that ONS is suggesting that the 5 weeks that cover April, we've seen over 97,000 deaths, with the average has been around 41,000 over the last 5 years. So there's a huge uplift in volumes that businesses need to deal with. It's tough. It really is tough for everybody out there to find the capacity, the skill, the compassion to deal with it. And it's a challenge for the customers to be able to get to speak to the right people in a timely manner.
It is all about sort of getting through to that organisation, isn't it? That's the biggest challenge, I think. Yeah, and sort of even with sort of customers making calls not about bereavement as well, it is just that.
Yeah, it
getting
is.
through.
You're right. You alluded to at the top of the call there. Through Equinity, through the core of our business, we deal with around 300,000 notifications of death per year on average, and that's around 60% of the total deaths in a normal year. We were particularly keen to improve those journeys over the last few years. So sometimes you're a bit close to the process. If you're looking at it yourself, you tend to design it as much as you can try and put the customer lens on it. You design it for what works for you as a business. So the way we changed that ourselves is we actually got an external company in and said, have a look at what we do. Tell us how to be better. Forget the operational or the transactional side. Not saying that's not important, but it shouldn't be the primary driver on what that interaction looks like. So we went for a complete change of how we deal with those interactions with friends and families of bereaved customers. And we've seen a huge impact on two things. Number one is the quality of the engagement and the feedback we get on that. But just as importantly, a reduction in the need for repeat conversations. For example, now what we don't try and do is give a customer everything on the call, because if it's one of 21 calls, the information retention is low. So we tend to have some very clear guides that we then send to the customer via electronically or in the post, whatever works for them. And the one thing we always do is we make sure very early on in the conversation that we've got this for you. Don't worry, we'll take care of this. And the other thing we always do is we find out what is it you want to achieve today. If you just want to let us know, that's absolutely fine, because we know now, and everything can be paused for a period of time to allow you to focus on what's important. Funeral arrangements, contacting families and friends, and just dealing with the grief. Just as importantly, then they know we're there, and it takes a burden away. If we're saying, not in the exact words, but if we're saying, relax, focus on what you need to do, we've got what you need from us in hand. You don't need to worry about it. That's so reassuring, and that reassurance and the human impact of it is everything.
Yeah. And that's what they need at that time, isn't it? I mean, they're facing a really dark and challenging situation that some of them may have never faced before.
Yeah.
Actually, they just want somebody to say, yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, and I'm not calling any particular sectors out, but I am going to mention the telecom sector, the mobile phone industry in particular. One of the pieces of feedback we had recently was where somebody phoned up, took quite a while to get through, and they felt that the primary driver on that conversation was who was taking over the contract. It was something they hadn't considered they'd need to make the decision about prior to making the call. But then to be put on the spot and say, well, whose name do we change this to now? There's 18 months on the contract remaining. Who's going to be picking the contract up? I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. No. And to feel like that you have to think about that today is not right for the customer and doesn't help their environment that they're currently finding themselves in. Vulnerability takes many phases, as you'll know yourself, and it can be something that's related to health, to age, etc. But what we do know is that bereavement is a trigger for temporary vulnerability. So the most stable and in control person might be, running a huge organization themselves or running their own huge family. There's, somebody, mum at home, dad at home, looking after the kids, and on top of it, going through that process can completely derail your thought processes, your ability to make rational decisions. And also what we hear on a regular basis as well is, I didn't feel vulnerable until I picked up the phone and started engaging with these businesses who are asking me, whose name's the contract going in? What do I want to do with this? Where's the money got to be sent? And it's just too much too soon.
Yes. And I think as well with all of the restrictions around COVID-19, I think people who are facing bereavement, even if that person hasn't died from COVID-19, they're not being able to say goodbye. They're not able to be at their side possibly when they are passing away. They're not able to attend the funeral, or the funeral is very restricted, very different to what maybe that person had actually planned. So already on top of what they're facing, they've got these additional stresses, anxieties, emotional burdens that really then does impact how they are engaging with their family members and ultimately organisations.
That's absolutely right. And thinking of that as well from that side is, it may well be that maybe you've got a husband and a wife relatively old in their 70s. Maybe the husband's passed away and the wife that's left can't even lean on friends and family to come round because of the restrictions that the pandemic places on the ability to the need to social distance, I should say. So you can't have your kids come round, sit with you, comfort you, and take this away from you, because it almost puts you at risk as well as the remaining spouse. So it's all those things that, it's the chain of events, isn't it? The normality that was there to deal with bereavement and the support isn't as easy to get to or access, or you can't just hand things off now, because if you do, you've got no influence on that, and it just isolates you further. And some people want to deal with this if they've lost their partner they've spent the last 50 years with, they want to deal with this, but they need help to deal with it. Us as organisations need to take responsibility for how do we make this easier? What do we do to make this more humane?
Yes.
And more considered?
Yeah. And you talked about sort of those left behind having to deal with up to 21 organisations on behalf of the person that they've lost. When it comes to talking about the death of a loved one, then what's the benefit of a tell us once system?
If we look at it in two ways. The benefit to an organisation, first of all, which we'll look at, because many people who listen to this may be representing huge businesses which deal with tens of thousands of notifications of death a year. If you think about that, you would usually not know about that death till somebody picks up the phone and tells you. So therefore, it's an inbound conversation, and you as a member of staff in that organisation have to deal with it almost instantly. So what you're trying to do is listen to the customer, show empathy, be compassionate, but probably at the same time trying to access lots of internal information on your computer screen around what details you've got about the deceased. How do you identify whoever's making the call? What products do they hold with you? Flipping that on the model where DNS exists, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. If you get a data feed that tells you about this, straight away what you're able to do is prepare all the information you need to then make an outbound call to that customer. So that's one key element. The other aspect is that many organizations don't get early notification. If we think about some utilities companies, for example, if they've told a bank, they haven't told their utility suppliers, it may well be that the bank account's been frozen or potentially closed. Direct debits then don't get paid. The first letter goes out saying we think you've accidentally cancelled your direct debit. And this is examples we've been given. The second letter a couple of weeks later might be, now you owe us £50. The third letter is, we've been unable to contact you. There's a danger that this will be transferred to our third-party debt recovery agency. Particularly if there's an empty property that might be 200 miles away from the person that's looking after this, it may be a few weeks or months before they go through that post. And then that whole cycle of not a very pleasant interaction with that particular organisation, plus the cost associated with that organisation of transferring to third-party recovery agencies and wondering what's going on. So early notification, the ability to get an inbound piece of data that gives you that detail so you can prepare for it. From a notifier's point of view, 21 organisations to contact. That's looking for contact numbers. Some businesses, unfortunately, don't even still have dedicated bereavement numbers. So you go for a generic customer service number, you get moved around, you have to repeat over and over again what you're saying. And it's just the ability to go online as a friend or family member, choose the organisations from the members that you want to notify. And within 5 minutes, as it stands at the moment, you've told potentially up to 16 organisations.
That's fantastic, yeah.
Imagine the difference in timescale. And as we now, because originally obviously this was for banks and it was great for the BBAs, it was then UK Finance and the high street banks to get round the table and want to do this. And they've been brilliant to work with, and they continually look to how they can improve the service, help to promote the awareness with friends and family members of their customers. And they're great to work with. But increasingly what customers are asking for is, it's great, I can tell the bank, but you know what? They weren't the hardest ones to tell because they did have a high street presence at least. Why can't I tell my gas, electric, water company? Why can't I tell my home insurance provider, my car insurance provider, my Netflix account? And that list of 21 is growing every year as we start to have more diverse relationships. The benefits are, it's quick, it's easy, it's consistent. And the one thing that sometimes gets forgotten when we talk about DNS, it isn't just a notification solution, it's also a validation. When we take details of the deceased, we validate that against the General Records Office. Clarity on what General Records Office is, it's where all births and deaths are registered across the UK. So we are able to validate that death for our partner members and able to ensure that they know it's a genuine death, fraud prevention. But we also validate the identity of the notifier against an Experian file check. It doesn't leave a footprint, but what it does do is it does a check to confirm the identity. So it takes away all that need for ID&V. It takes away that need potentially for a death certificate, which, as I'm sure you can appreciate, particularly at the current time, isn't the easiest thing to get hold of. And even in the times when it is, it's costly to go out and get 10 of these to send them off to organisations. And some people are quite emotionally attached to the original death certificate because it's all they've got left to an extent. And sending that into an organisation, and in some cases telling us they never get it back, it goes missing, or it's got to be kept on a file. So the benefits are huge. The government operates a similar service, which doesn't include commercial entities. It's for pension companies, council tax and so forth like that. Currently 3 or 4 deaths are registered through that service. It proves that if there is a digital opportunity to do that, people will use it because it's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And also it's available, and for example, if you're overseas and you need to contact a bank, building society, utilities companies, trying to phone them usually means you have to get up in the middle of the night to do it. Whereas this can be done very simplistically any time of the day or night.
Brilliant. I mean, just sort of thinking, I think we're week 8 into lockdown, and we don't really see an end in sight, do we really? So I think we're going to see the impacts of this for a really long time. So what can organisations learn from this situation with regards to vulnerable customers, or indeed for all their customers and staff?
The first thing I think is it's made us as a nation or globally more accessible to deal with death, because we are living in an environment where, as we've touched on in previous conversations we've had, every day at 5 p.m. we're all glued to the press conference and we're given numbers of people that are dying, which are horrendous volumes, even still now as we allegedly are up past the peak. So it makes us realise actually this is something we can talk about, we need to talk about, and we need to get better at not just dealing with it operationally, but as organisations. One of the things that we do at Equinity as well, I've touched on the training we do, we ensure that if somebody is struggling with the emotional side of this, that we work with local charities, we can put them in touch with people they need to speak to. And I think, we work closely with Cruse, with Money Advice Trust, and a whole host of other charities. And we welcome engagement with all types of charities and grief counsellors to make sure that people have got access to what they need. Grief is difficult and people deal with it in different ways. As organisations, it's difficult for us to train our staff to deal with grief. So what we can do is train them and encourage them to be human, to be personable, but also get to understand what's really going on in that person's world at the time and what else can we do. Because it may well be that we're the only people they're speaking to when they make those notifications. They may not know what support and guidance and help is out there. So let's not just deal with what's important to us as a business, which is it's got to be done. I accept that. It has to be done. Businesses have to operate. But let's take a moment to think about what else can we do that makes this whole process easier. Look for the signals, look for the triggers. If somebody is coming across like they don't know what to do, they're struggling to arrange a funeral, they don't know how to organise this, let's help them. And if we can't, let's make sure they're aware who can and how to get that help.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do training on obviously vulnerability, and signposting is a huge element of that, is actually sort of building that resource bank of who you can signpost to, what support they offer. And it can really be that lifeline for that individual, because their head is probably completely and utterly spinning with everything that they have to deal with. And actually, if somebody just sort of says to them, yeah, contact Cruse Bereavement, contact Step Change, contact Mind, all of these, they can help you. That's what they do. They can help with those aspects that you're struggling with.
And they are great organisations and they're great organisations that want to work with us. We recently had the Call the Money Advice Trust with Chris and Andy from Cruse.
Yes.
And what we talked about is actually none of us in isolation have the solution. Collectively, by working together, we can make sure that we provide the best operational experience with a customer-centric approach. We can give access to the guidance and the grief counselling and the organisation support that people need. So it's about, this isn't a competitive aspect of any business. Dealing with bereavement is not a competitive. It's not one of those areas where there's intellectual property that needs to be protected. Let's open the doors of our businesses to each other, even across sector, and say, this is what we're doing, which we think is working well, but these are the areas that we need support on. How are you doing this? And similar to yourself, I'm sure you go around very different organizations of different sizes across different sectors, and sometimes it all feels like they're trying to reinvent a solution that already exists, but all they've got to do is just open up and say, how do you deal with this? We don't need to reinvent the wheel. The wheel's already out there. We can round it together and do it better by working together on those things.
And I think what I've been thinking is that this year, 2020, is going to be the year. We've sort of had customer service as a phrase. We've had customer experience was the new phrase. I think this year is actually going to be the phrase of human experience. Is actually now really engaging, emotionally connecting with that customer that you're talking to.
I know as a staff member, I've ran contact centres myself and I've worked in them, some quite huge in financial services. I always preferred making an outbound call when I was prepared and had the information to hand than dealing with an inbound call, having to try and be human,
yes, whilst
trying to understand what the case notes on that customer's history tell us. So that ability to be prepared and be personable comes a lot more. And increasingly what we see as well is that when somebody contacts an organisation, they don't want to necessarily make the longer term decisions today. No. It's almost like, and I touched on this on some of the other calls we've had with other organisations, is around, today is about, I just want to tell you, I just want to let you know my dad has passed away. Everything else I will deal with in a week or 2 weeks.
Yes.
And what we're seeing is lots of organisations now adopting the policy of saying to a customer that we don't need to deal with this today. Focus on what you need to do. You won't hear from us for the next 30 days, 60 days, or whatever it may be. If you want to come back to us in that timescale, feel free to do so, but we don't expect you to. We know this is difficult and we're going to keep out your way and let you deal with what's important.
Yes.
And I think we need to see that customer choice of not just how we notify you, but also how much do I need to tell you on day one?
Yes.
Let the customer decide that. I appreciate that sometimes organisations need more information, but let's think about what do we really need today that's going to have to be critical. Sometimes just knowing prevents the letters going out. There's nothing worse than getting a bill in your husband's name if he passed away 2 weeks ago. It's just those things that we don't think about sometimes about it's not just how we talk at the point of notification, it's the ongoing collateral and correspondence that people receive. And 6 months down the line, if you're still receiving a letter in your dead husband's name, that's not very nice.
I think I read somewhere that a deceased person in the first year after their death receives 110 pieces of post through the door.
It could well be. It's not a piece of information I can corroborate, but it sounds absolutely completely reasonable, doesn't it? And
that's 110 times that something is coming through the door to remind the person left behind that person is no longer with them.
And I wonder how many emails as well.
Yes.
On a daily basis from organisations which are making you aware, with the best of intentions of better solutions and services for you, but you don't need them, do you?
No.
It's all that aspect to it. There's so many benefits of getting early notification and allowing you as an organisation to deal with all of the elements of that bereavement that you can. Just stop the correspondence going out, pause the bills going out while the friends and families get the priorities resolved. In many cases, most people will want to pay what's owed. They're not trying to get out of it. And I appreciate, organisations need to get bills paid. That it doesn't need to be paid on the day of notification.
No.
It doesn't need to be, let's give breathing space.
It's all about building trust and building relationships with customers and even potential customers. So even if that person ringing is not your customer, how you deal with that actually could ruin your reputation, or it can actually strengthen your reputation. So it could be a potential customer coming in the future. So really sort of just bringing everything that we've covered to a close, really. So are there any final thoughts that you would like to share with the listeners today?
Yes, I think just to bring it all together is to really make it clear that DNS isn't trying to take away that relationship with the friends and family. What it's trying to do is augment and make it easier. We will work with any organisation in any sector to help them put the friends and family of their deceased customers at the centre of a solution. When you join DNS, you don't just get an online platform, you get a fully supported solution, which not only gives you access to our business, but access to all the other partners to share ideas. And we don't have all the answers, but collectively, we're going to find it much easier to find them. Tell us what your challenges are. Talk to me. Let me explain to you how it works, the value it adds for you, the solutions it provides for friends and family members, where this is going in the future, and how it all works.
Wonderful. That's great. Thank you so much, Michael, for being my guest today. Such an important topic, isn't it, really? And very of the moment as well, with the amount of people that are facing bereavement. So if this topic has raised any questions or concerns with you, please do get in touch with Michael and the team, and you can contact Michael at michael.kennelly@equinity.com, and that email address will be in the episode details. If you wanted to talk about anything to do with training around vulnerability, then you can email me at info@helenpettifer.com. And if you are actually going through bereavement, if you are facing this tragic experience, then please do get in touch with Cruse Bereavement, and they do offer advice and support. And you can contact Cruse on 0808 808 1677. And again, that information is in the episode details. So thank you for listening to this episode today, and please do take care of yourself. Stay safe and stay well. Remember to subscribe to my podcast and leave a review. And you can also follow me on Twitter at hpettifertrain. And I look forward to you joining me on my next episode.